Hello, I'm Dr. Almida Riodica. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist with special interest in feeding. And I'm currently part of the Pediatric Society and Subspecialty Society Committee for Nutrition. And today we'll be talking about complementary feeding, or what we call early child nutrition. Babies will choke if they self-feed, as long as the food that we offer them will be age appropriate. So like we said, in 6 months up to about 9 months, they can take already puree. And as they grow older, let's say at 10 months to 12 months, the food that they eat can have more lumps in it, moving towards more crunchy food and whole food. Then there should not be any fear of choking if the child self-feeds. So gagging is actually a reflex that helps the child not to aspirate. So kapag the food goes in the wrong tube, going towards the breathing tube, then the child gags so that the food can be placed back into the mouth and swallowed appropriately. Now, there are some children that when the food is very large, or if the food cannot be accommodated through swallowing, nagagag sila. And this is something that we need to observe. It can be normal, especially when children are beginning to eat complementary feeding, but it is something that we need to observe and to make sure that there is safety. So when the child is gagging, then you try to look for the reason. You see if the food that you're giving might not be appropriate in consistency. Baka you need to mash it a bit more, or baka you're giving too much. Another thing that parents would usually ask is, do the babies need teeth to eat solid food? This is actually a myth, because babies without teeth can actually start eating solids. And I'm sure most of the breastfeeding moms out there would agree that even without teeth, the children's or the baby's gums are actually strong enough to take solids. So the next would be, babies can eat what the families eat. Now, with this concept, we want to make sure that the family is actually eating healthy meals. If the family is eating healthy meals, then the babies can eat what the family is eating. Again, being changed in consistency based on the child's capability based on age. Healthy meaning it's natural food. Better if it's non-processed, really coming from, let's say, the market or the grocery, being cooked at home. And then, appropriate size and appropriate consistency. Ano yung mga pwede nating ibigay as first food? There's no rule. You can give as an initial complementary food, even meats. It doesn't have to be always lugaw or rice. The fruits and vegetables can be given. Any of those natural, healthy food can be given. Certain foods such as honey or raw food like raw egg or raw fish, yung mga sashimi, hindi pa pwede sa kanila because of risk for infection, because uncooked meat or uncooked food, no? So basically, everything that the child eats should be healthy, non-processed, and well-cooked. We can stop giving breast milk or formula when we start to wean the babies. For this concept, what we'd like to do is really phase in or transition the complementary food or the solids such that as we go along, or they're able to take in more solids, then they're able to decrease already the milk intake. Now, breastfeeding can continue more than 6 months, even up to 2 years and beyond, as long as the child and the mom are both willing to breastfeed. With this, it can be a good partnership between breastfeeding and solid intake. But for a child, let's say more than 1 year of age, we want to make sure that milk intake does not hinder the child from getting hungry to eat solids. So if a child is taking more milk, then we know that there might be less appetite for solids. So that's something that we need to really balance. If you feel that the child is not eating so much solid foods, then you might want to offer the solid first and then give the milk afterwards. Because remember, feeding is a skill. So we know that they know how to drink milk because they're familiar with that since birth. And so when they're having a hard time, whether it be a new consistency, a new flavor, it's a skill and it's a challenge for them. So they would, of course, anybody like us, no, we'd want things to be easier. So they'll turn to the milk. But we want them to develop the skill. So for these children, if you feel that they're not eating so much solids, then offer the solids first before the milk. But in a child who has no problem, is a good eater, then there is no rule. You can give the milk within the meal. We always advise that the meal schedule should follow the family meal schedule. So that means breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and maybe as the child grows older, 1 or 2 snacks in between. For each meal, it should be spaced by 2 to 3 hours. Why 2 to 3 hours? And that actually comes from the fact that after 2 hours, the stomach is emptied already. And so it's ready to accommodate food. So by that time, because the stomach is empty, the child is hungry and will be willing to eat. And that should be the schedule, no? We don't want children to be eating food, what we call grazing, where they're non-stop being given food, let's say crackers, and then after 30 minutes, they're given cookies, and then after another 30 minutes, some other snack, and then they sit down for a meal. That is not something ideal. So we want them to be able to develop that mealtime habit of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks as long as they are spaced in between. Another thing about weaning, food is just for fun until they're 1. Now, this is a misconception because from birth onwards, everything that the child puts in the mouth for nutrition is actually very important. We need to support nutrition early on in the first 1,000 days of life so that the child is able to grow appropriately. So food is not just for fun, it's for nutrition, for growth and development, but it should be fun when we introduce complementary feeding. How do we make meal times fun? So meal time is actually a family socialization time. So we don't want children eating by themselves. I see some families who feed the child first, and after they feed the child, that's when they eat. No, the family meals. We want the kids or the babies to be eating with the family. Why is it? Because number 1, when the child or the baby eats with the family, he or she is able to see the adults eat. So they now become good role models that this is how the child should be eating. Fun also because children love face-to-face interaction. So that makes it fun. Allowing them to touch their food, make a little mess, again, based on their developmental age. Not being so strict about, some food falling or food getting on their face or food getting on their clothes, then it makes it fun for the child. That's how we make mealtimes fun. We don't advise that there be any toys that is not associated with feeding or any gadgets in front of them when they're eating. We want them to be focused on their feeding. We want them to be focused on the adults who are also eating, and so that they will enjoy the mealtime itself. How do we know that they're ready for complementary feeding? Number 1, the most appropriate time for complementary feeding would be 6 months of age because that allows us to maximize breastfeeding. Second, aside from the age, we want to know that they have good head control. Because if head control is good, then swallowing is most likely going to allow them to eat solids. Aside from those 2 things, If the child is brought to the table and they're interested when families eat, they seem to lean forward towards the food, seem to open their mouths when adults are eating, then it seems that there's readiness for them. What do we expect in children who are starting to eat solids? So the number one rule is don't expect that they'll like it right away. Remember, introduction to new food can be a challenge. So like us, sometimes we're not as adventurous in trying out new things. But what I'd like to let the parents know is with exposure, repeated exposure, and good role modeling, then these children will eventually learn the skill. Again, feeding is a skill. It's not automatic. They need to learn it and they need to enjoy it. We can expect that stooling can change. So, ibig sabihin, their stools. It can either become more mushy. On the other hand, they can have a bit of constipation. The stool color can also change because now they're not only taking in milk, but they're taking in different sources of nutrition. Of course, in some children, when they're weaning, there can be some changes in nutritional status, and that's why it's very important for parents to really follow up with their pediatrician so that their nutritional status can be monitored during transitions in feeding. If there is a take-home message for complementary feeding in children, we want the parents to know that number one, this should be a fun transition. Fun meaning children should be eating with their parents so that there's good role modeling and that habits can be developed. Second, there's no hard and fast rule. What's important is we look at each individual child, the capability of that child, and be able to progress consistencies and flavors based on that. Lastly, try and try and try, because children may not automatically like a new food flavor or a new food consistency. But with frequent introduction and exposure to these foods, then we know that they'll eventually be able to take in the family food that we are offering them. And if these doesn't turn out to be as easy as you'd like it to be, then there's always your pediatrician whom you can go to and ask for advice.